Sixers,
It's good.
and Flyers.
Oh, big save by Carter Hart.
97.3 ESPN, WENJ, WENJ HD, Millville, Atlantic City, a Town Square media station. This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
What a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, live in living virtual color on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, where you can watch the show as we are live in the Matt Black Kia Studios here on 97.3 ESPN. Yes, Matt Black Kia. They only get you approved today. Matt Black Kia on the Black Horse Pike in Egg Harbor Township. Bryan Toporek from the NBA podcast, Forbes Sports NBA writer, will join us coming up at 6:20 to get into the Sixers, the Eastern Conference, the MVP race, and more. Also, we got to talk about the NFL draft and how it impacts the Eagles. Another news story, another news bite, and another element, how it will impact the Eagles. And of course, you guys can chime in as you watch on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, on the comment stream below, or on the text board, 609-403-0973. To get on the conversation, 609-403-0973. But before we get to the Sixers stuff, we got to get to the NFL draft stuff. Also, before we get too far along, I will give you the latest Phillies roster updates, because there are more roster changes, moves that have happened. But first, I got to get to the NFL thing. So literally like a minute after Mike Gill and Andrew DeCecco finished up with football at 4 today, this story comes out from Adam Schefter. And I realized that because of everything that's going on in the world right now, that if I tweeted this out when I did, it would get lost in translation. So what I did is I saved my opinion for right here, right now with you guys. So here's the story. And for those of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, I will pop it up on the screen for you guys to see as well. For you guys listening on the radio, I will read it for you right here, right now. And that is, Adam Schefter says, Carolina Panthers have had conversations with other teams about potentially trading back in the draft from number 8 overall, per source. Schefter goes on to say there are all sorts of ongoing trade conversations between the teams. Let's see what next week brings. So, couple of things to take from this. Number one, this is a direct side effect of what is going to happen in the top of the draft. All right. At the top of the draft, you're going to see at least 3, if not 4 quarterbacks go in the top 4 picks. We know that Trevor Lawrence is going 1. We know that Zach Wilson is most likely going 2. I gave you my theory about Trey Lance going 3 yesterday. I'm going to assume then that means there's a team that could trade up for Justin Fields. Whether that's 4, whether that's 5, whether that's 7, I don't know yet, but I feel like one of those picks is going to be traded. And as I said yesterday, don't rule out 5 only because of the fact that the Bengals are not fully sold on who they want, even though we know who they should take at 5th overall and who they probably would take. I'm not ruling it out. They can make a trade out as well. We know the Lions have a lot of needs. So that leaves the Panthers in a position where they may think we can get the player we want and still move back. Mike Tannenbaum mentioned this on Get Up this morning on ESPN television about the fact that there's a lot of times when teams will call other teams and say, hey, we're going to establish beforehand trade parameters before we get to draft day. So that if XY player falls to you, then we'll make that move. So with the Panthers are already having conversations, I feel like that's kind of the concept, that the Panthers are already gauging the market in a world where they have a situation where teams are going to be trading down. And I promise you right now, the list of teams calling them is at least 10. There's at least 10 teams calling them. And one of them is the Eagles. So whether the Eagles were to trade up to 8 or 9 or even 7, even though I feel like 7 is probably going to go to the highest bidder, and then Carolina will get whoever's left over. And there's a possibility that Denver might be the team that trades at the 4th overall to get a quarterback. And then whoever Atlanta wants at 9, they'll just let fall to them, because Atlanta's in the beautiful position to just say, hey, man, best player available. Come on in. Our team stunk last year. Let's go. So the Panthers are having conversations. And to me, this fuels the speculation of the Eagles trading up even more. This fuels that speculation that the Eagles are making calls. And it's not because they're not happy at 12th overall. It's not that they made a mistake trading from 6 to 12. I think people are getting that concept twisted. You trade down from 6 to 12 because you are now guaranteed at minimum 2 first-round picks in next year's draft. You would be crazy to say no to that. I understand there are some people out there who are very short-sighted, who have no perspective, who have no foresight, and can't think beyond the next 5 minutes of their food. All right? Listen, there is a world beyond today and tomorrow. So as a result, you have to plan ahead. And if you're the Eagles, you are not just drafting for this year. You are drafting for next year and the year after and the year after that. Now you have a chance at 12th overall, because 12 and 8 or 12 and 9 are within close proximity. It's not going to take a lot of resources to move from one spot to the other. So when you look at those teams like Detroit, like Carolina, if you're the Eagles, the value is, okay, I can trade my 12th pick I have right now with a 3rd round pick to move up. And if Carolina or Detroit needs a sweetener, you already have one in hand. His name is Zach Ertz. Because we all know that you have teams that always want to use tight ends. Tight end is now the hot commodity in the league. Everybody wants to have multiple tight ends available. You saw what the Bucs did in the Super Bowl, right? They actually had 3 tight ends, did the Bucs. So if you're a team like Carolina who's trying to put Sam Darnold in the best position to be successful, if you're a team like Detroit, which is basically rebuilding your entire roster at this point, thanks to the knee biter in chief Dan Campbell, you have a situation where you could use Zach Ertz if you're those teams. So a team like the Eagles calling and saying 12th overall, 3rd round pick, Zach Ertz, that sounds a heck of a lot more appealing than sitting at 8 and wondering, is the guy we want we're going to pick too high? Because you never want to be the team that reaches for a guy, right? You never want to be the team that drafts Blaine Gabbert and looks like an idiot forever because you didn't draft J.J. Watt. Nobody wants to be the team that drafts the wrong guy. Nobody wants to be the GM who drafted Vernon Golston high in the draft because you drafted a guy that you shouldn't have picked there when you could have traded down. So as a result, this is a huge deal for the Eagles that the Panthers are having conversations, because if Atlanta's having conversation and the Panthers are having conversations and Denver supposedly wants a quarterback, then if you have 4 quarterbacks go in the top 4, then there's more players getting shifted down the list. And I don't think there's any scenario where Howie Roseman is going to pick 11 players. I feel very confident from everything I've heard and read that there's no way the Eagles are going to walk out of this draft with 11 players out of the draft picks. Text board is open, 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. You also can comment below here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter where you're watching the show right here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig here on Game Night Live, the Matt Black Kia Studios. Don't forget Bryan Toporek from Forbes Sports, NBA writer, as well as the co-host of the NBA podcast, will join me in about 10 minutes from now to get more into the 76ers, Joel Embiid, the Eastern Conference, and more. But first, I want to remind you about my friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, because I love betting on basketball with FanDuel Sportsbook. You know why? Because same game parlays. You can take player props, game props, money lines, spreads, over-unders, and you can bundle them all together into a same game parlay to score an even bigger payout. And they're only available on FanDuel Sportsbook. So if you haven't tried FanDuel Sportsbook yet, new users can get a risk-free bet up to $1,000. Just place a bet and FanDuel will refund you up to $1,000 back in site credit if you don't win. Also, new and existing users can get up to $25 back in site credit each day if your same game parlay falls one leg short, thanks to same game parlay insurance. That's right. Every single day you bet with same game parlays, you can win with FanDuel Sportsbook. There's a reason why FanDuel Sportsbook is a #1 sportsbook in America. So don't wait. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. Use my promo code Hennig at sign up to get the risk-free bet. Your first one up to $1,000 back in site credit, as well as same game parlay insurance. That's promo code Hennig when you sign up with FanDuel Sportsbook. Must be 21 or to play and present in NJ or PA. Refund issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Max refund $25. Terms apply. See sportsbook.fanduel.com for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Speaking of the Sixers-Warriors game last night, listen, we had a bad beat last night. All right. We got bad beated in the face last night with our same game parlay because everything was looking great last night. It was looking really good because Steph already got the 30 and you're like, all right, well, that nailed it. But then Joel Embiid scored 28 points. If Joel Embiid would have scored 2 more points last night, our same game parlay would have hit because the Sixers-Warriors game hit the under, Steph hit the over 30, but Embiid didn't get the 30, so the same game parlay didn't work out. But that means if you go to same game parlay insurance, you would have gotten $25 back yesterday because one leg on the parlay didn't hit. Another example why FanDuel is where you need to go. Now, speaking of the game last night, Steph Curry was amazing. But I would argue that that game would have looked a lot different if Ben or Tobias were playing because of 2 things that happened in last night's game. Number 1, Mike Scott scored 0 points in 14 minutes. He was literally in the lineup as a body. He wasn't there for anything else. He didn't give you almost anything last night except for a foul. He got 0 rebounds, 0 points, 0 assists, 0 steals, 0 blocks, and he was 0 for 1 shooting. He literally was there as a body. He didn't do almost anything last night. Danny Green, solid, good game. Seth Curry, solid game. Korkmaz, not a great game, but he tried. If Tobias Harris is out there, Mike Scott isn't giving you zeros across the board in the stat sheet. You're going to get more points out of Tobias than you would have gotten from Mike Scott, Dwight Howard, and Shake Milton combined. Shake had a horrible game last night. He was really rough to watch. I think for George Hill's first game back, I think what you expected. He's a guy who runs the offense. He's a guy who's going to get you in and out of offensive sets, and he's a guy who's going to be a serviceable player. But if you would have had Ben out there last night, Steph could have still gone for his huge game of 49 points. But you think about the rest of the starting lineup for the Warriors, the rest of the starting lineup wasn't horrible. They weren't great, but they weren't horrible. They still shot almost 50% from the field combined. Bazemore was 0 for 5. The rest of the team was pretty good. Draymond Green, 50%. Wiggins over 50%. Kevon Looney at 50%. Those guys combined for 31 points last night. Draymond Green barely scores at all. Bazemore is basically a waste of a player at this point in the league. Wiggins is basically an overhyped, mediocre wing scorer who can get you 16 points. And Kevon Looney isn't a scorer at all. You don't think there's a possibility that Ben might have stopped some of those extra points? He might have shut down Wiggins altogether. Wiggins' offensive game is so limited, it's ridiculous. So, to me, when I look at the game last night, I don't hate the Sixers for losing the game. I just say, listen, if Tobias or Ben played last night, he might have won the game. Can't promise you that Joel Embiid would got his 30 points and won our same game parlay, but hey, Sixers might have won the game. We'll get more into the Sixers and NBA next with Bryan Toporek at Toporek on Twitter, the NBA podcast. He is the co-host, NBA writer for Forbes Sports. Joins us next here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City. We can customize your app alerts right now. Just go to the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, customize your alerts. You want Sixers and Flyers alerts, you want Eagles and Phillies, South Jersey High School sports, all customizable app alerts with the 97.3 ESPN mobile app.
It's the 2021 NFL Draft exclusively on 97.3 ESPN. Who will the Eagles take with the 12th pick?
With the 12th pick, Philadelphia Eagles select.
Tune in to 97.3 ESPN to find out. Thursday, April 29th, round one coverage begins at 7 p.m. It's the 2021 NFL Draft, and it's only on South Jersey's exclusive radio home for Philadelphia Eagles football. 97.3 ESPN.
0 down payment, 0% financing, and $2,500 off MSRP on every 2021 Nissan Murano in stock.
Oh, yeah, it's on at Matt Blatt Nissan.
The word is out. The all-new Matt Blatt Nissan and the all-new 2021 Nissan Rogue. Lease a loaded SV model, just $269 per month with 0 security deposit. Plus, Matt Blatt Nissan needs your trade. Even if you owe more than it's worth, pay 0 down, pay 0% financing, and take $2,500 off MSRP on every new Nissan Murano in stock, plus our fast-track checkout. So bring any trade to Matt Blatt Nissan in Egg Harbor Township next to Home Depot or online at mattblattnissan.com.
Negative equity will be refinanced into new vehicle. Rate qualifications exist. Not all will qualify. 0% APR financing based on 1667 per thousand borrowed. Offers can't be combined. Call 877-289-6670 or go to mattblattnissan.com for complete details. Offer ends 5/4/21.
It's on at Matt Blatt Nissan on the Black Horse Pike, Egg Harbor Township.
active lifestyle, aches and pains can be part of the game. That's where Trifecta Therapeutic comes into play. Trifecta Therapeutics is a premier sports rehabilitation physical therapy center located centrally for anyone in South Jersey, right in Glassboro. Whether you're a weekend warrior or a finely tuned athlete, they treat the pros and the Joes. No script needed. To schedule your free discovery session, use code ESPN Radio at trifectatherapeutics.com or call today.
Whatever you need, whatever you dream, let's make it a reality. Ocean First Bank, putting you first.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, we will get to your texts and thoughts a little bit later in the hour. Text 4609 403-0973. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can watch the show. And, of course, our Sixers conversation here being brought to you by Trifecta Therapeutics in Glassboro, South Jersey's premier sports rehabilitation and physical therapy center. Treating the pros and the Joes. Visit them online at trifectatherapeutics.com. So after the Sixers lose to the Warriors last night, obviously people have a lot of questions about the rest of the year. There's only so many games actually left in the year as a whole. So getting to all of that and more. He is the co-host of the NBA podcast. Also catch his work over at Forbes Sports NBA contributor. Bryan Toporek joins us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline and live in virtual living color here on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, how you doing today? Okay, well, we thought Bryan was there. Bryan, can you hear me? I think Bryan's having the same problem that PT had a little bit earlier with Mike Gill. So Bryan, we cannot hear you, so you may want to double check your settings over there. I'll just let Bryan know that we can't hear. So we're going to just pop you out there for a moment, Ryan, while you figure out your settings there. But again, the Sixers played last night. They took on the Warriors. Joel Embiid obviously only got 28 points, so there is something to be said for Joel Embiid and the Sixers. Is Joel Embiid still an MVP candidate? Something we talked about on the NBA podcast previously. We'll bring up Bryan Toporek again here in just a moment as he's recalibrating himself here. So let's bring Bryan back in to the conversation. Bryan, can you hear me now? As you say in the Verizon commercial,
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Right.
So
Sorry about that.
Technology is a beautiful thing.
Always.
So one of the reasons why I, aside from the fact that I enjoy talking to you about the NBA, is the fact that you and Mort had a very interesting conversation on the NBA pod about the situation with the MVP race. And to me, this is kind of where I stand. I'm not against Jokic winning the MVP. I'm not one of those people. But I do feel like there is this attitude about Embiid sometimes that people want to find excuses to not give him credit. When people forget that a huge chunk of those games that he missed was because of COVID protocols. It wasn't all injuries. And to me, and maybe I'm just crazy for thinking this way, but in an irregular regular season, in the COVID pandemic world that we're slowly coming out of, are we really going to hold the same standards against somebody that we would in a real world regular season? I just think it's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If it was a question of like Jokic is putting up his normal averages prior to this season, and his main argument was availability versus Embiid, who is setting career highs across the board, basically, then yeah, I think it would be a much closer argument than it is right now. And I wrote something at Forbes about this. Like, I don't think the MVP race is over, but I do think Nikola Jokic is the deserved frontrunner right now. Vegas odds makers are favoring him. He's on pace to have only the second season in NBA history with 26 points, 11 rebounds, 8 assists per game. The Nuggets offense is just worlds better with him on the court. I looked this up a couple days ago, but they're averaging like almost 123 points per 100 possessions with him on the floor, which would be almost 6 points better than the best offense in NBA history. They're shooting almost 8 percentage points better with him on the floor. So, you know, I know the battle lines have been drawn between Nuggets Twitter and Sixers Twitter in particular with Jokic and Embiid, and I wrote something at the step back about that, where I just want us to really appreciate how good both guys are. They're very different in the ways they approach the game and what makes them so good, but they're both been absolutely dominant this season.
Well, also part of appreciating the fact that in a league full of 3-point shooters and guards and Steph Curry going nuts, you have arguably the two main MVP candidates are both 7 foot tall. Like that in and of itself should be a credit to them and less about anything else. Because to me, we've been waiting for this. Like as basketball fans, at least I speak for myself, I feel like basketball fans have been waiting for the post Dirk era of big men. Getting past the Dirk, Durant, Anthony Davis guys, dudes who can do those things, but also can go back in the post, because for some of us, we are old enough to remember Hakeem and the Shake and Patrick Ewing and the baseline jumper. And to many of us, it's not that those guys are lesser than the guys today, but maybe those games would have been a little different if they would have played in today's game.
Right. And yeah, I feel like, Anthony Davis was definitely the next big hope for a big man for a while. And he's lived up to that reputation, obviously, what he did with the Pelicans and last year with the Lakers. I feel like Karl Anthony Towns had that label on him for a while, and he's put up huge numbers in Minnesota. That team is just so bad that, I think he's suffering a bit reputation wise. Whereas if that team gets better, if he, forces his way out, gets to another team, I think the perception of Karl Anthony Towns will go up pretty significantly. But yeah, it's been phenomenal to see. Really, I mean, from Philly's perspective, Embiid, this is what we were promised that he could become. When they drafted him with the number 3 pick, it was always a high risk, high ceiling pick. Whereas this guy has the injuries. You don't know that he's ever going to hit this ceiling. But if he does, he has the talent to be the MVP of the league. And whether he wins it this year or not, it's inarguable that he's having an MVP caliber season.
Bryan Toporek joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN, co-host of the NBA podcast at Toporek on Twitter. Check out his work over at Forbes Sports covering the NBA. Now, speaking of the MVP, I got to ask you, because I think one of the other side of the argument to me is, and listen, personally, and maybe it's because I'm in the area, I would give the MVP to Embiid. And it's because to me, that letter V stands for something. And I feel like every year we have a problem. And that is the V is supposed to be who is most valuable. And so many times the award is discussed for the guy who has the best stats, who has the most historic numbers, who has the sexiest stat line. And it's like, but that's not the award to me. The award is supposed to be who's the most valuable player, not the best player in the league. Who is the guy who is undoubtedly, if he was taken out of the league, if he was taken off of his team, it would be a huge detriment. And I understand Jokic does fit that category, but to me, Embiid is literally starting to elevate to that level where you put him on almost any team and they're a contender. He's almost getting to that level.
Yeah, I think if you're going with that argument, there's 5 guys that I'd put in the mix. Jokic, Embiid, Steph Curry, who we saw last night light up the 6. I mean, that Warriors team has no business being around 500. They are, outside of Steph and Draymond, they are garbage. But Steph is just on an absolute historic tear as of late. Dame Lillard, you could put in that conversation. Luka Doncic as well. So it's, I think this is one of those years with MVP where there isn't a clear-cut favorite. You can make arguments for a bunch of different guys. And, Mort on the podcast has railed against this for years now, how there isn't clear criteria for really any of these awards. What is most valuable player? As you said, is it the guy who, if you remove him from the team would go from 55 wins to 20 wins? Is it the guy who's having the best statistical season? Is it the guy who's on, one of the arguments in Embiid's favor right now, the Sixers are the number 1 team in the East? Is it the guy who contributes to winning the most? I know someone from ESPN tweeted a hilarious stat the other day. It was in terms of guys who lead the league in winning percentage, Joel Embiid has the 3rd highest points per game in the league history. It's that is such a ridiculously obscure stat, but I'm definitely going to use it all the time to argue that Embiid should be MVP.
I love it. But seriously, like you said, it's one of those deals where you can make an argument for multiple guys. I just feel like, to me at this point, it did feel a little bit, going back to what you guys talked about on the podcast, the whole ESPN did that survey, 90 people, first place votes for Jokic, it almost felt like it was like, well, we'll just give it to him because he survived. And I said on the show yesterday, it's like, listen, you know what I think of Survivor? I think of WWE Survivor Series, and I think of Thanos saying I'm a survivor. I don't think of the NBA MVP award. So it feels like just because you're the last man standing of not missing games this year shouldn't be a prerequisite of you winning the MVP. So like you said, we don't have a delineation of who should win it. So all of this is so subjective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited if Jokic does win. We can call it the asterisk MEV from now until the end of time, and it's going to infuriate Nuggets Twitter. So that is one bullet in the chamber that we can just hold for now. I will say this: I think Embiid has a chance to overtake Jokic. Still, I think you're right that it feels like, based on some of the conversation from national writers, especially Bryan Windhorst the other day, feels like some of the people who will be voting on this award recognize that right now Jokic should be favorite, but they're not super excited to vote for him. So I think with Embiid in particular, the Sixers had a nationally televised game last night against the Warriors. They have three coming up this week against the Suns tomorrow, Bucks Thursday and Saturday. Obviously it would have been nice if they could have gotten the win, but Embiid still put up massive numbers despite the loss, and you can write that off. Ben and Tobias both in the best game, so it was tough sledding there regardless. If they come back and go, win these next three games against a very, very good Suns team and a Bucks team, who's one of the best teams in the East, all of a sudden, I think that's going to give a little bit of narrative heft to Embiid heading into this stretch run. And you've got two games coming up against the Hawks next week, who ever since Nate McMillan took over, they're very quietly ripping off. I think they were like 17-6 or something like that. So they're also, firmly in playoff position in the East. They have a ton of talent, a ton of offensive firepower. It should be a fast-paced, high-scoring game, so should lend itself to Embiid putting up big numbers there. So, yeah, I think, this MVP race could look a lot different in 2 weeks, depending on how the Sixers handle themselves over this next tough stretch.
Yeah, and Clint Capella has an opportunity to prove that he's more than DeAndre Jordan 2.0 as well.
Yeah.
Bryan Toporek joining us here on Game Night, the co-host of the NBA podcast here on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, speaking of the Eastern Conference, obviously there's a lot of attention given to the Sixers and the Nets because they're the two top teams. And Kevin Durant gave me an extra bullet in my chamber because he now has a thigh contusion, whatever that's really supposed to mean. I'm not fully sure because at the end of the day, you basically could lump a lot of things under that category, but it's another example to me why I think it's bogus the Nets are favored to win the East, because we've seen these guys on the court for 8 games. 8 games, the three of them. And to me, if you have two guys with hamstring injuries, which are nagging injuries, another guy who's had, personal reasons why he can't get on the court sometimes, which may or may not be legitimate. I don't know. I don't know Kyrie personally, but what I do know is availability matters in the playoffs. And if for whatever reason Durant or Harden are not out there, I don't think the Nets have a chance in any reality to get to the final. So to me, it's the Sixers should be the favorite, followed by the Bucks, followed by whoever else you want to put in there, because to me, the Nets have this huge question mark over their head of, will these guys ever be on the court, Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the number one question for the Nets is health. And this news just came by about 15 minutes ago, but James Harden apparently suffered a setback with his hamstring. He's now out indefinitely. They're talking about, he could be back by the start of the playoffs, could be back a little bit before, but it doesn't sound like we're going to see James Harden anytime soon. So as you said, the KD, Kyrie, James Harden triumvirate will not have played together very much, less than 200 regular season minutes so far. That isn't a ton of time to develop chemistry, develop timing with one another. Their hope is that talent will just win out, because I think if the Nets enter the playoffs fully healthy, and if you can guarantee me that they will stay fully healthy throughout the playoffs, I would put them as the favorite. I think they present, especially with the Sixers, they present a number of matchup problems I don't think the Sixers have good answers for. Are we going to see that fully healthy Nets team? That I don't know. And also, seeding is going to come into play here. You got 3 elite teams in the East, the Nets, the Bucks, and the Sixers. 2 of those teams are going to have to play each other in round 2, barring any upsets. So it makes that race for the number 1 seed really important. I think the Sixers have a chance to come out of the East if they keep that 1 seed. If they fall to 2 or 3, I'm a lot more bearish on their chances.
Yeah, and also if it's the Nets versus the Bucks in the second round, for just use as an example, well, guess what? If Durant or Harden don't play, you're telling me the Bucks can't beat the Nets? I mean, Kyrie Irving is a phenomenal talent, but I think he's proven time and time again he can't elevate a team, whereas Giannis has shown you he can at least get you to the conference finals. He hasn't gotten any farther than that, but at least can get you there. So to me, I don't understand the obsession with the Nets. I feel like it's all being driven by the NBA 2K age, as I call them. Everyone who says, I did this trade on NBA 2K and I did this with my roster on NBA 2K, so it must be real.
Yeah, well, I think it's a question of top-end talent tends to win out in the playoffs. And in KD and Harden, again, assuming both are healthy, you could argue those guys are both top 5 talents in the league or somewhere, top 6, top 7. The only other team in the league like that are the Lakers with LeBron and AD, and the Lakers don't have a number 3 option like Kyrie Irving. So with those 3 guys, I mean, I just don't know how you stop all of them offensively if all of them are healthy. And the Nets have a nice collection of glue guys, Jeff Green, Bruce Brown. They've got some shooters like Landry Shamet, Joe Harris. So they have a nice collection of talent. But again, we just haven't seen them fully together. And, that's the question. Will chemistry end up being an issue? Will they just not have their timing down right? It's, especially late in a close game, especially later in a series as the pressure ramps up, are they going to know where each other is going to be at all times on the court? Are they going to have a full playbook at their disposal? We just don't know. And that's going to be one of the most interesting questions of the playoffs. What version of the Nets do we see?
Bryan, the other question I have about the East is, outside of the Sixers, Nets, and Bucks, which of the other teams would create the biggest threat to the top 3 that's left in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mort actually presented a case for the Atlanta Hawks, which when he talked me through it, it made more sense to me because they really, again, assuming health here, which has not been a sure thing all season for them, but they've assembled a ton of offensive talent. They could just outgun you in a 7-game series. Trae Young could go off 1 game. Danilo Gallinari could go off 1 game. Bogdan Bogdanovic could go off 1 game. And it only takes, each one of those guys having 1 elite game to push you through. I still think it's Miami, and that might just be bias based on what they did last year. But, Jimmy and Bam are just such a tough defensive duo. And then if we get a healthy Victor Oladipo added to the mix, I'm not super high on him and his fit there, especially, I think adding him with Jimmy and Bam, that's a lot of non-shooters on the floor at one time. So he might be better off in a 6-man role. But, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson can go off at any given time. They also added Trevor Ariza, Bielica, Sixers legend, Nemanja Bjelica at the trade deadline. So, I think they have, if everything breaks right for them, I think they could pose problems. But they've just been so inconsistent all year that it's hard to have a ton of faith in them. Like, I don't think I'm going to go into any of those series picking Miami to upset any of the top 3, but I didn't go into the series last year with Miami and Milwaukee picking Miami to win, or I don't even think I picked Miami over Boston. So, they kind of thrive. That Heat culture thrives in that underdog role. That wouldn't shock me to see them make some noise again this year.
Yeah, and Nemanja Bjelica will be a part of that Sixers 30 for 30 about 15 years from now.
That's for sure.
He'll be a topic there. Bryan, before I let you go, and this is more of a selfish question than anything else. This is probably the least NBA legitimate question I have to ask you today. Last night, I'm watching NBA action after Sixers game, and I see the Bucks wearing uniforms like the Washington Wizards and the Jazz wearing uniforms like the Seattle Supersonics. Can you explain to me modern NBA uniforms? Because I feel like the further we go along, the more I'm seeing teams say, it doesn't matter what our color scheme is. We're just going to create uniforms. And for someone like me who might be watching multiple games at one time, I'm honestly getting confused at times.
Yeah, I think you can thank the NBA's sponsors and jersey creators for that. They just do not care about anything traditional. They just want to print as many different jerseys and sell as much merchandise as possible. Revenues are hurting, man. Fans couldn't come into the stands for most of the year, so you got to make up the money somehow if you're going to print 15 different jerseys for a 72 game season, I guess that's the way to go.
But I mean, why is it? I mean, this is like, for example, if everyone just had a blackout jersey, like the NFL does it, every team has a blackout jersey. I get that. Okay. I totally get that. But at some point, those blackout jerseys still have their team colors on them.
Yeah.
I'm watching that Bucks game last night. The Bucks were playing
Phoenix.
Phoenix, thank you. I'm like, okay, that's Phoenix's uniform. I get it. And you know what? Their fancy uniform, it's a little ridiculous, but it's still their color scheme at least. When I'm watching the Bucks, I'm like, am I watching the Jordan Wizards or am I watching the Bucks? And then I flip over to the Jazz and Lakers game, and I'm like, when did the Seattle Supersonics come back? Like the level between like making jerseys and just being like insane. Like I just don't like. When did the world become Oregon football?
We need what was it called? The NFL, the color rush, where
color
like
rush,
the neon vomit. Let's have that for every NBA team. That's the genius idea next year.
He's Bryan Toporek, co-host of the NBA podcast. Check him out on Twitter at @Toporek. His work over at Forbes Sports, and as all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Bryan, always appreciate you jumping on and keep up the great work.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Josh. Anytime.
And of course, our Sixers conversation today being brought to you by our friends over at Trifecta Therapeutics, easy for me to say, in Glassboro, South Jersey's premier sports rehabilitation and physical therapy center, treating the pros and the Joes. Visit them online at trifectatherapeutics.com. We'll get to your text messages at 609-403-0973 on the other side here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM. And don't forget the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. It's free. Thanks to First Bank of Seattle City. You know, before the end of this show, I will pronounce something correctly.
It's Sixers basketball tomorrow on 97.3 ESPN with the voice of the 76ers, Tom McGinnis, calling all the exciting play-by-play action.
Jab step, dribble move, spins, hangs, puts it in the air. He can't be stopped right now. Tobias Harris, beautiful turnaround shot.
The Sixers host the Phoenix Suns tomorrow. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. Philadelphia 76ers basketball on your radio home of the Sixers in South Jersey, 97.3 ESPN.
On some models, excludes Corvette with GM financing. Excludes prior sale. See dealer for details.
It's Bennett Chevrolet's Spring into Savings Super Sale. This month, you'll get Bennett's famous GM supplier employee pricing on new Chevys, and you keep all the rebates up to a 25% discount on some models. There's no need to negotiate. Just get here and get your new Chevy at the GM supplier employee price, and you keep all the rebates up to a 25% discount. There's another way to save big with Bennett's available 0% financing. Plus, Bennett's paying a minimum $7,000 for any trade you can bring us, regardless of condition. That's a minimum $7,000 for any vehicle towards any pre-owned on our lot. Imagine how much more we'll pay for your good quality trade. And because our non-commissioned sales staff is paid on your satisfaction, not how much you spend, there's never any sales pressure and never any negotiating needed. No stress, no hassles, no haggles. Just your best car buying experience ever. Find new roads at Bennett Chevrolet, Egg Harbor Township, and BennettChevy.com.
healthy. You exercise too. But why, oh why, does your tummy have to pop out like that? Well, Dr. Lyle M. Back knows it's not your fault. There are a number of factors that cause your abdominal muscles and skin to lose their elasticity, like pregnancy, weight gain and weight loss, aging, and no diet, TV gimmick, or sit-up routine can change that. But with the tummy tuck, Dr. Lyle M. Back can help you get a tighter, flatter abdomen. Feel better about yourself. Call 856-MAKEOVER today. That's 856-MAKEOVER, or visit iloveLyleBack.com.
Quick Draw from the New Jersey Lottery makes winning feel epic.
I will pick up to 10 numbers. Then the game will draw 20 numbers. Who's with me, Jersey?
I want to match more so I could win more.
My $1 bet could win up to $100,000. Let's go!
Go epic with Quick Draw. Played every 4 minutes at lottery retailers. Anything can happen in Jersey.
Must be 18 or older to buy a lottery ticket. Please play responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, final segment of the show. Great stuff from Bryan Toporek, who joined us just a little bit ago. Get to your text messages here. 609-403-0973 is text board. 609-403-0973. Also, you can comment as you watch the stream on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. We typically get your texts in the order they came in. We will first go to Dan in EHT, who chimes in on the text board and says, the Eagles need 11 players from the draft. They need talented youth big time. I also heard the Philly Fanatic is playing center field for the Phillies tonight. Can you confirm that, Josh? I'll get to the Eagles thing first in just a moment. But listen, the Phillies thing is ridiculous. And it's so ridiculous. So I told you all earlier, the Phillies made more roster moves today. Okay, you might not have heard because of everything going on in the world. But here you go. So the Phillies, at the day after calling up Damon Jones, they optioned him right back to Lehigh Valley. And they sent Christopher Sanchez right back to Lehigh Valley. And they've recalled Bailey Falter, and they've recalled Ramon Russo. And they added Ranger Suarez and Cornelius Randolph to the player pool. And a right-handed pitcher named Rob Kaminsky has agreed to a minor league contract. And it's been added to the player pool as well. They're all going to report to the alternate training site. So the Phillies just doing the shuffle. They're just shuffling guys around. They're just moving them all around. Like, my goodness. And then your lineup tonight is Matt Joyce in the leadoff hole, followed by Segura, Harper, Real Muto, Brad Miller at first base, Alec Boehm, Mickey Moniak, Matone, who got his first major league hit last night, and Zach Wheeler. So you want to know who's playing center field tonight? It's not the Philly Fanatic. It's whoever's healthy and available. That's who's playing center field tonight. That's going to be an interesting experiment to watch. Now, concerning the Eagles and 11 players, listen, I understand they need all the youth they can get. They need all the youthful talent they can get. But time out, Matt, from Dan from EHT. Here's the problem with that. If you draft 11 players, I can guarantee you not all 11 players are going to make the team. It doesn't matter if you're the Eagles, the Patriots, the Bears, the Chiefs, the Texans, the Dolphins, the Falcons. Doesn't matter what team you are. Almost never does all of your draft picks make a roster. It's very, very rare. The whole point of the 7-round draft is to get as many players as possible because you know that not all those players are going to work out. So if you draft 11 players, maybe only 4 of them make the roster. Maybe only 5 make the roster at the end of the day. So I think that I understand they need talented youth big time, but you got to get the right talent, not too much talent. Just because a guy is young and he played college football doesn't mean he's the right fit for the Eagles. So I'd rather the Eagles walk out of the draft with 6 players and 5 of them make the roster than with 11 players and only 5 of them make the roster, right? So I think that's kind of how I view it. I feel like you want to get the best players, not just a plethora of players. 609-403-0973. George texted into the show. He says, get this, somehow Mike Scott's plus minus last night was plus 11. I'm dead serious. That's George on the text board at 609-403-0973. George, you're right. And that's why plus minus to me is one of the most useless stats in sports. Plus minus is one of those stats where it's used when it's convenient for the person trying to make the argument. So, for example, if you don't like fill in the blank player, you'll find a game or two or three or a stretch of games where their plus minus was bad. Say through the NBA, same thing for hockey. It's this idea that plus minus is supposed to be way more valuable than it really is. Plus minus to me is only valuable when it comes to team plus minus in terms of points for and points against. When a team has a very good points for, points against average, if it is like, let's say plus 100, that's a big deal to me. If you're minus 11, that's a bad deal to me. So to me, plus minus is more valuable for a team measurement than an individual measurement, because Mike Scott did nothing last night, but he had a plus 11, as George points out on the text board. It's just ridiculous. By the way, you heard Bryan Toporek talk about the fact that the news came out about James Harden. Here's the full report on Harden from today. The Brooklyn Nets have announced that James Harden experienced a setback while conducting on-court rehab on Monday and will be out indefinitely with his hamstring strain. So I told you guys before, these hamstrings are tricky. It's not a cut and dry recovery. But hey, you want to continue living in the fantasy world that the Nets are minus 110 favorites to win the Eastern Conference and they're prohibitive favorites, you go and live in that fantasy. I'll continue living in the real world where I don't know when all three of those guys are going to be on the court together. And you could argue that James Harden and Durant are way more valuable to this Nets team than Kyrie Irving. If you have at least Harden on the court, you have a chance to me if you're the Nets. If he's out on the court and it's Kyrie all by himself, you are dead. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the show tonight. Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. I'm Josh Hennig. At Josh Hennig on Twitter. I'll be back in tomorrow for a Wednesday edition Sports Bash with Mike Gill at 2 o'clock. Game Night, 6 o'clock tomorrow. Have a great night.
It's your chance to win Sports Bash Cash up to $10,000. Enter the code words every day at 973ESPN.com or with the free mobile app. The more codes you enter, the more chances you have to win up to $10,000. Here's the Sports Bash Cash code word.
Kitchen. 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 Enter it now on our website, 973ESPN.com, or use the free mobile app. Sports Bash Cash is brought to you by Jersey Shore Federal Credit Union for all your lending needs. Get the next Sports Bash Cash code word tomorrow morning at 9:55.
It's Sports Bash Cash 10 times a day, every weekday at 55 after each hour from 9:55 a.m. to 6:55 p.m. Listen all day for your chance to win Sports Bash Cash up to $10,000.